So growing in spring brings along its own challenges. It's not something you can't overcome, but it's something to keep in mind, because obviously the garden is going, everything is well. And really carrots exemplify one of the main issues associated with growing in the spring is getting the seeds to germinate when it's not warm out and the soil temperature is much cooler to where it is now. Once everything gets going and then the sun is out longer and the soil temps go up, life really comes together in the spring garden portion of it. But if your spring is slow to be a spring, you might get a quick ramp up into summer. So that's one issue, that it might go very cool spring and then it will ramp up to a very summer-like heat and temperature that certain plants do not like. So you may see bolting very quickly. You may see your plants not responding as nicely. And the other thing associated with spring, sometimes they just don't make it. So sometimes they just kind of peel over and die. Spring comes with, I would say, much more windier weather than typical. And plants, especially when you transplant, they have not been exposed to that sort of condition before, and they tend to not like that. So there is one option of getting around that, and that is using the greenhouse, but I'll show you the issues associated with that. So direct sowing, transplanting, you just have to have the timing right, have the weather cooperate with you, and it will go. I mean, a large majority of the garden that we have here is working quite well. The potatoes, the peas, onions. You're going to get some loss here and there because of bugs or weather, or in the case of carrots, maybe subpar germination. But it's really working with the weather, the conditions, and nature to kind of make it all work. But it's not as easy as just throwing seeds into the ground and letting them go. There needs to be constant upkeep and awareness associated with outside growing in spring than compared to the other months, because we're still cold. The soil's still cold, and seeds don't want to cooperate at times like that. So I'll show you what the greenhouse is in comparison to growing outside. So like I said about the outdoor spring garden, you can have difficulty with germination. You can have sluggish growth that eventually gets too hot. Alternatively, you can get rid of both of those issues and do your growing in the spring in a greenhouse. Now, take into account that this greenhouse has the tarp all the way down to the bottom, so it can't roll up. The only ventilation that I have is the open window in the back and the screen door, what we have here. So outside it's about 60 degrees. There's no really humidity, but it's bright and sunny. And so if you look at the temperature in the shade, you can see even in very nice spring-like conditions, it is like a sauna in here. So if you were to take now in comparison to the size of the plants that I saw that I showed up in the spring garden to what I have here, these are essentially the same seeds planted at the same time. Especially you can see the difference in carrots. You can see a significantly 10-20 times more growth in size of the carrot. It's not exposed to the elements, it has the heat associated with it, and it grows better. The romaine looks good. Spinach is pretty much going to already be done compared to the stuff that I have outside that is pretty much nowhere. And the Swiss chard is just kind of being sluggish. That's all good, but as I told you, that's most likely going to bolt soon. This, if I were probably eat it today, would probably taste more bitter. It doesn't really like the heat, and it puts that dislike into the taste of its leaves, so that's not as good. The carrots will more or less be okay, but then you have other plants that just die. So these are the broccolis that are probably a third of the size up in the spring garden. So they were certainly ahead of the spring garden, but as the heat, even though I try to water as much as I can, you can see some plants just do not like the heat and they will just die over. So yes, you can reduce the issues of growing outside and start growing inside, but if you don't have a good setup or pretty much a close setup like I have, you also have to balance out the issues associated with here. So you have a shorter growing window as compared to the outside. Transplant, or growing sowing your seeds and then having them for transplant, you see tomatoes, the summer loving plants, are growing quite well. and they will continue to grow well, such as the peppers. But as it is probably over 100 degrees in the sun, you can see very dry soil. So we try watering these once, twice a day, and then no matter how much we water, these things are always dry. And because of that, you will then have transplants that don't really like that and will die off. So yes, you can switch out of the outside and go indoors, but sometimes the indoors in the spring is actually too hot for these sorts of crops. And just like in the outdoor with the spring, you need to have that balance, understanding your conditions that you have inside to make it worth it for everything else that you have going on here. So no matter the circumstance of how you're going about it, either are going to have cons that you need to be more aware of, and just understanding it in your climate to maximize both the growth that you have inside with the growth that you have outside. So something to keep in mind. I thought it was a good comparison between an indoor and outdoor during a spring-like season to give you an idea of how this goes about.